Welcome to Faith-Filled Investing, the podcast where faith and real estate intersect. Join host Owen Cooper as he interviews real estate investors who are also strong believers in Jesus. Get inspired by their stories and discover how they live out their faith in the workplace. Learn practical tips and strategies for successful real estate investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor or exploring alternative ways to grow your wealth, this podcast will motivate, educate, and connect you with like-minded Christians in the real estate industry. Tune in to Faith-Filled Investing and join the movement of faith-driven real estate investors.
Welcome to Faith-Filled Investing. I'm your host, Owen Cooper, and this week for our first edition, we'll be hearing from me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my faith journey, my real estate journey, and how those two have intersected. So, a little bit about my faith journey. When I grew up, my parents weren't going to church, weren't really in a Christian home when I was a kid, and interesting way of intersecting real estate and faith from the very beginning. My faith journey, as far as I know, actually started when my parents bought their first house, and that first house happened to be right next door to a church. And so it's interesting, even from the very beginning, how location and where someone lives and the real estate that they live their life on makes a big difference. So for me, at this house, these people from this church were the kind of people who came and knocked on our doors, invited my sister and I to things, and got us involved in kids choirs and and just really accepted my family and loved my family. I always describe it as they loved us into the kingdom. And so it was through a series of things and times that God really got my attention. So as early, even as fourth grade, I remember going to my first Sunday school class with my teacher, Dwayne Wolliver. I remember, going to youth group as a kid, and my youth directors. I was kind of a handful, so they were always a little concerned when I came, but they were glad when I finally gave my life to Jesus. And I remember in 8th grade, I got invited to go to this little event in Jefferson, Wisconsin, and it was there that I really committed my life to Jesus. And so from that point on, went through high school, certainly my shares of rebellious struggles, into college, ended up going to a Christian college, and going into college, I felt like the Lord wanted me to go into ministry, and so I was going to be a pastor because that's really all I knew that as far as what ministry meant. I was from a small town. Only people in ministry I ever saw were people who were pastors, so I thought that would be the path I would go on, and ended up being a path I was on for much of my ministry life. But because of that, I went to a Christian school. Not only because of that, but that was a part of it. And I remember talking to the advisor before I started. I was going to major in biblical studies and Christian education, and I said, if I don't want to go into ministry, what can I do with that? And they said, well, you could be an editor, at a publishing company or something. And not a ton of great options there, but I took the leap, and that was my major: biblical studies and Christian education. And after college, I came back home and did some coaching, and ended up getting a job as a part-time youth director, and did that for a couple years. And then I went into Mexico, and I worked with a church planter, and I did that for a year while getting married. So it's kind of a complicated timeline, but got engaged right before I left for Mexico. Was Mexico for about 6 months, came back, got married to my amazing wife, who has put up with all sorts of crazy adventures since then. And then I took her with me for the first 6 months of our marriage. Our plan was to be there longer. We had a whole lot of new things happening, including getting pregnant really quickly after we got married. And so because of that, and just a lot of just a lot of transitions, kind of more than we could handle at the time. We decided to come back to the States, and this was back in 2002, I think. So, it wasn't like you could just do a whole bunch of online searches. So I tried to find some jobs while we were still in Mexico. And we were trying to figure out where to live. I grew up in a small town in southern Wisconsin. My wife's family was in a small town in southern Minnesota. And then my sister lived in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so we ended up going there just because there were more jobs to find. That was really kind of the reason. So we lived with my sister for a few weeks. I went around. It sounds so old-fashioned, but I literally went from store to business, and sat in their lobby, filled out an application, turned it in, went to the next business, filled out an application, waited for someone to hear back from me. Didn't hear anything. Saw a little ad in the paper, tiny little ad. It's so weird. Like, do people look for ads in papers anymore? I don't know, but I saw a little ad in the paper, and it said property manager. So I filled out some of my resume and faxed it in. If people know what faxes are anymore, and I don't know. A few days later, I got a phone call. They wanted to bring me in for an interview for that property manager position. Now, I have to tell you, at that point, I literally did not know what it meant to be a property manager. I didn't even know what that meant. It was a job. I'm like, hey, I could do that maybe. And so the interview was so funny. This is still a good friend of mine. Still in contact today, but the interview was the funniest thing to me. In a tiny little office, there was the lady working there on the computer. She had a chair, a computer chair, and then there was a card table just piled high with legal documents from closings and properties he was working on, and that was it. No other chairs. And for some reason, I can't remember why, my wife was with me. So there's three of us. We're just standing around this card table, talking, having this conversation about, I don't know, my experience and who I was as a person and whatnot. And for some unknown reason, this guy decided to hire me. So I got jobs as a property manager. Now, at the time, I did have another job as a dock truck driver, which I hated. I couldn't stand. But it was a job, and so this guy offers me a job, and I said, can I get like a job description? Because he had called me. He's like, how come, like, when are you going to start? And I said, can I get a job description first? So he gives me a job description. It's very vague, and other duties as assigned, whatnot. And so kind of my training was, here's a cell phone, first one I've ever had. Here's some keys, for the units, and just try and get them filled up and go and collect rent. So that was my training. Had a bunch of questions. Call them all the time with questions, and then because I was managing, he'd done so this is what Troy had done, a bunch of rehabs, bunch of flips, and had done that a lot, and then started buying bigger apartment buildings. And these apartment buildings had a lot of Spanish speakers in them, so he needed someone to speak Spanish. That's why he hired me, and he saw he could trust me because he was a believer. I didn't know that at the time, but I found out later that he was a believer. So because I could trust me, and everything else was just kind of got trained in as I went. So, because I was managing, I don't know what the limit is, but enough apartments of other people's apartments, I actually had to get my realtor's license. So he paid for me to get my realtor's license. I started discovering the joys and excitement of real estate, started reading about real estate, taking classes, finding about foreclosures and creative financing. And I remember sending away, I still have them in my file cabinet, stacks and stacks of things I printed off to read through. And then so at this point, I didn't even have my own house. I was using one of the apartments from Troy that I was managing. That was part of the deal. I got to live in an apartment, and so I'm like, hey, I want to get into this deal. And so I bought my first house from Troy. It was one of those flip projects, and that's where we lived after that. And then I bought my second one from his brother-in-law. It's another flip, and I kept the first one, and I rented it out. And that was the beginning of my real estate investing career after, learning from him about that. So, and because from him, I met all these other people who were doing that. And so one guy was his painters who did the painting for his jobs wanted to get into the game too, and so we did a couple projects together, and we bought some things and flipped them, and bought some things and couldn't flip them, and ended up keeping them as rentals, and just was growing a very slowly small little portfolio as we were kind of moving and keeping our old houses and acquiring other things. And then 2008 happened. 6, 7, and 8, and everything crashed, and I had a couple bad tenants in one place in a row, and I just didn't have any cushion, any buffer, because I was just starting out, didn't know what I was doing, and because of that, and ended up I started working for another nonprofit back in the ministry world, and all their funding dried up, and so I found myself without a job, and I ended up losing all of my real estate that I had acquired up to that point. And it was trying to end up moving, and part of that move included getting a job as a campus minister at UW Whitewater in Wisconsin. So here I'm flipping back over to ministry, and real estate kind of sat on the shelf for a while, and so there I was. But even in that time, I remember looking back now. I remember I was always looking at things. I was listening to classes. I was reading books about how to get back into real estate. How can I do with bad credit? How can I do with no money? Because I lost everything, and it was just always kind of there. Meanwhile, full on in sort of the ministry world, pastoring a church, doing campus ministry, helped to start another church there. And just so you don't think that these are like opposite only things, like even when I was in Minnesota doing all this real estate stuff, I was helping to start a house church type model there. I was involved in the missions committee on my church before we did that. So these things were always worlds were always kind of intersected, sometimes one more than the other. And when I got to Whitewater, like all the real estate just became like a hobby. It wasn't doing anything with it. Doing full on in ministry, and transitioned from that when we started church, and then I started working for other nonprofits, Christian educators, and tent makers, who I work for now, and has been always been a part of my work story, has involved tent makers, and the work I'm doing there with Year on Mission and young adult gap year type program. And so that's kind of takes me up to probably 2019, when I got the bug again, and I realized I really wanted to kind of restart my real estate investing business. And so I kind of jumped full in, got some coaching, and went after it. And I grew my portfolio, not hugely, but up to about 15, 16 units in about 3 or 4 years, and got some investors to come in with me and do the deal. I did some rehab projects, about 1 or 2 a year. Started acquiring portfolio of rentals near me, and then also Milwaukee market. So I started doing that up in really, in the last 4 years. Now here I ended 2023, about 4 years later, and really wanted to scale up. So I've always been interested in multifamily. I think because when I started my real estate journey, I literally started by managing multifamily, bigger unit apartment buildings, and just seeing the value of that as an investor, and learning to interact with people. It wasn't something that was scary to me, like, oh, someday I'll get there. I just was never able to pull it off. And so this year I've been made a more concerted effort to focus on multifamily. Again, got some more coaching, joined a great group of people I love working with, to help me get more into multifamily. So that's kind of what I'm doing now and how I got there. And so ways that I've seen Jesus and real estate intersect in my life. Again, to me, it's kind of all been in my life. I feel like I've always kind of passionately wanted to run after Jesus. The real estate thing is something I literally kind of just fell into and discovered it and was fascinated by it. And really, I talk about like catching the bug of just wanted to be a part of it. And for me, there's been some things that have really, I don't know, I think that some things that have held me back in real estate because of my faith is that a lot of these, if you look at these like commercials or people in the marketing, they try to convince you like real estate is where all people make all this money, and most of the millionaires in the world are through real estate, and they show you all their fancy cars and houses and all the vacations they can go on, and it's alluring, but it's like, yeah, it's alluring in a way that I feel like it's not supposed to be. I'm supposed to be living for the Lord, and there's this I feel like there's this concept in the church that poverty is holy and wealth is dirty, and I feel like I've sort of unknowingly grabbed onto that, and so um, I think I've always had this desire to do good. And I think, I mean, even just very recently, there was this aha moment for talking with my wife, Stacy, and I were talking about, how actually by making money, um, it allows you to be more generous, to be more giving, and it doesn't have to all be about you. And I've started to recognize that actually money doesn't make or break any person. It's what's going on inside of your heart. And inside of your heart, if there's generosity and joy and love, then that comes out. And if there's greediness and stinginess and selfishness, then with more money, that more of that just comes out. And so I've really been, I think, kind of learning a lot more about that. And as every year I read through Proverbs like 3 times a year, and especially in Proverbs, you see all these principles, and they're sound, biblical, practical principles. And you realize, like, the righteous, if you follow these principles, you actually will get more money, because you're not squandering your money in things that you shouldn't be squandering your money, and just bad lifestyle habits. And um, so anyway, so those are some things for me that I think the Lord has been doing in my life, getting me to think about real estate investing in a different way and getting me more excited about it. And even part of why I've started this podcast, to see how these things actually do intersect, and they're not separate worlds, but they are. This is another world that God can use. He created the earth, and the earth is real estate, and and from that, good can happen and bad can happen depending on who's operating within those worlds. And so I want, as a Christ follower, to be operating well in that world. And so another thing, I think, I remember when I got my first rental, and I remember my first tenants. I'll never forget them. Great little family, little kids, and actually they were believers. Didn't know it at the time, again, but found out later. And I remember thinking, I really like to pay back, and I remember writing. We were on a trip with my wife, and I wrote this in a little notebook and stuck on the dashboard. It was there for years, about this idea of, creating like a scholarship fund for tenants, or some way to give back and pay back. And I haven't created that yet, all these years later, but I feel like I have a much more clear vision of that, and I'm so much more closer to that. And I really do believe that actually through multifamily and through my family of investors that I'm gathering around me, that we're going to start doing that. We're going to start creating scholarship opportunities for better education, or for their kids, or for camps, or things that they want to go to or can go to, and to make their lives better. And my faith has been a part of like what's driven me to do that. To see it's not just about using people to create wealth, but actually so it's a win-win. So wealth is being created, but the tenants' lives are actually better and improving by living in a building that I live. I've also helped a few people. I'm hoping it will be more in the years ahead, with rent-to-own programs, and helping them get into their own homes and be able to afford them, and ultimately buy them from me. And I've found great joy in being able to do that as well too. So I think, some of my values within my Christ-centered values in real estate have shown through in those ways, as well as just the way I conduct business.
Hi, Owen Cooper here with Rock Solid Investments. Sorry to interrupt this amazing conversation that's going on, but I did want to mention that if you are interested in investing with my company, or even just curious about it, please go to my website, rocksolidinvestments.com, ROC solidinvestments.com. You can sign up for newsletters. You can book a time to talk with me, and we can talk more about what that investing journey would look like for you. So glad you're part of this podcast. And now let's get back to the conversation.
Try to be kind to people, find the best in others, not be all angry and just assuming things. So I remember, as one time I was closing a deal, and my income looks weird because I have some W-2 and I have some 1099 and I have some investment properties, and my 1099 and my W-2s look really similar. And there was one time there was sort of accusing me of like cheating on my taxes, and I was like really offended. And I remember having like, man, you can't just make these claims like that. And I remember getting mad at them, but I worked through it. I talked to the mortgage people and whatnot, and it was very challenging. And I think my faith held me through for that, and hopefully I represented Christ well in the midst of that. And there was another time, a deal I was doing where I had actually rented, instead of buying the house from an older gentleman that I was going to rehab. It was like a rent to own, so I was renting it as I was rehabbing it and had full permission, and he knew all that. But basically, I didn't buy it until just a few weeks before I sold it, and it was very, that raised a lot of red flags, and there was concern. People are asking about, if I was like, cheating this guy that I bought it from, and they were having a hard time getting a hold of him. And again, this sort of my integrity is being questioned. It was really a rough time for me because, man, I just, my character is so important to me. And if you lose that, you lose kind of everything after that. And I remember, again, struggling through that and working through that, trusting the Lord, kind of fighting for my name, but trusting the Lord at the same time. And those moments, I think, are really ones that have, I think, the Lord has built my character and caused me to trust him even more because of that. So there's a few challenges I've encountered in real estate. And I think another one I kind of shared a little bit, but back in 2008, I was building my little portfolio and just lost everything. And I remember actually part of the way the Lord got us through until the next job started in Wisconsin and we were able to move is I drove around and I took pictures of properties for an insurance company, and then I would upload them and send them over to them. This was before smartphones, and then send them to them. They just wanted to see the building still existed or whatever, and then I did that, and then they would send me some checks, and then I was a leasing agent, which means that I worked for a property management company, and I would show apartments, and if someone rented the apartment, I would get like a small commission for that apartment. And that's what we lived off of. We left off those two things for basically a summer, for about 3 months before we were able to move, and I was able to start collecting income again. So, I've seen those. Though it's been a challenge. I mean, I was watching my bank account just slowly dwindle down to zero, had no income, was waiting for things. And, the Lord has proved faithful in so many ways. And I think for me, in some ways that helps me because I recognize I'm not living actually for money, for making money. I'm living and trusting in the Lord, and whether I'm, working as a full-time pastor or part-time pastor, full-time ministry, all the things I've done and is a part of my life. I mean, my W-2 is still with Tent Makers, it's still doing ministry. That what I'm doing in real estate investing is not, this desire to get rich, but it's the desire of actually the process itself, and seeing that it intersects with people's lives. It's where life actually happens, is in real estate. Businesses and houses and all these things. So for me, that's been a thing for me. So I think for me recently, I think about how as I'm seeing God intersect in my real estate life, and now is part of why I've started this podcast, of wanting to bring on other people who are living out loud for Jesus, and in the real estate investing space. And so my desire for to get this story out and to communicate with more people and to just let people know what I'm doing, to not kind of have it be a thing on the side. Like, I'm doing ministry and those are cool God things, but then this thing on the side that I'm doing that I'm not really talking about. And I wanted to flip that around because I realized that God is working through the things I'm doing in real estate. It's actually part of my ministry that they actually are the same thing. And even me starting this podcast is part of that, as well as newsletters and little videos that I'm putting out there for people to see and trying to grow the audience in that way. So I think it's just part of the growth that's happening within me. I think one challenge, again, it was an aha moment, and it was almost a little embarrassing, was recognizing, part of our work at 10 Makers with the gap years. One of the things that we really emphasize with people that are coming through is that work and ministry are one. They're not separate things. There's not this holy thing and then this secular thing. But anything you do for the Lord is holy, and it's part of your ministry. Your work is your ministry. And I've been teaching that to other people for years, but I've been treating my real estate investing separately. Like it was just a thing over here that was helping to fund my ministry instead of being part of my ministry. And so for me, this has been a kind of an awakening of recognizing that I'm going through those together, and then just partnering with people who maybe have that same voice, or maybe I'm helping them to discover their voice and to be a little bit louder about their faith because I'm willing to step out and be vocal about my faith, and to lead by example. So it's been fun for me, and I'm just beginning in this journey, but I'm excited to, as we unroll more podcasts and more episodes, for you to experience this, for you listeners. And just even as a plug, I recorded the next podcast already with my friend Jacob Sheets, and it is good. It is a good one. So I encourage you, after you hear this introductory one of me kind of talking, rambling on, that you jump onto that next one when I release it. It will be worth your listen for sure. So another question maybe that is good to talk about is, for someone who is considering investing in real estate but hasn't started yet, what would you say to them? Well, I guess I would say, actually, my first video thing I did was just begin. Jump into the game. Don't wait for the perfect thing. Don't overanalyze. I mean, you got to be smart. I'm not saying don't analyze it all, but I've done a bunch of deals. Some have turned out great. Some have turned out terrible. Some I've lost money on. Some I've broken even. Some I've made some money. But every one of those has helped me to learn and to be a better investor and to know what to do and what not to do. And the other thing I would say is partner with someone. Learn from other people. And I would love to have you partner with me. I'm gathering investors around me so I can get these multifamily take more money, takes more investors, more collaboration. Part of what I love, honestly, working with other people. But just to find someone who's done more of it. And again, that's what happened with me, even though it wasn't necessarily on purpose. When Troy gave me a job, I learned a ton from him and the people around him, and how to do it and what not to do. And I've gotten coaching throughout my investing career. So don't try and do it on your own, but also just start something and get into a deal and do something. I think another thing that I tell all my kids to do is to buy. I always tell them, buy 4 units as quick as you can, owner occupied. It's a great way to get into the investing deal. If I had learned about real estate when I was younger, earlier enough, I would have done that. I would have got into that. But I think that's a great way to get started. And I'm trying to help some of my kids and like some of my friends in their 20s do that very thing right now. I'm just talking with them about that. So yeah, I would just say, just do it. Jump in, get some education, learn some things, talk to people, ask questions, and try something and see what happens. And then some reasons that I've invested in real estate. You've probably heard me talk about it throughout this time already, but for me, again, it's the make all this money has been actually more of a turnoff than anything. But the thing that keeps me investing in real estate is that it's interesting. It involves with real people, real people's lives. It's where people live and work, and you just see the advantages. And there's all these advantages that I would tell you. As an investor, I have a presentation I put together. It talks about the tax advantages and how people who get wealthy, most of them do it through real estate, and there's and it's just a way to hedge against inflation and a place where your money can grow that's secured, it's tangible. Those are some great reasons. But honestly, like for me, I also invest in real estate because it's fun, because I enjoy doing it, because it's just pleasurable. And I can say that because even when I don't enjoy losing money or going in a bad investment, even when I have, it hasn't turned me off or I haven't gone sour. So I'm never doing that again. I say, okay, I've learned. Let's keep moving, and I go back. So, so the difference I've seen in my life, I think, I'm not driving around in fancy cars and super wealthy, but it has created some income for my family, and it's allowed me to help other people make their lives better. It's allowed me to help create jobs for people, whether it's contractors or even be able to pay my dad to go fix something at one of my rental units, or work on a rehab. Those things actually mean a lot to me, and so I've enjoyed that. As far as a favorite investing strategy, you've heard me mention these a number of times. A couple things is one, owner occupy a 4-unit if you could. You can up to 4. You can owner occupy without getting commercial financing. It's easier financing, and then and the other people can help you pay your mortgage. It seems like a genius thing to do. Another thing that we started doing that my friend suggested, he says, as long as you can handle it or your spouse can handle it, buy a place owner occupied, live in it for a year or two, buy a second place, and instead of selling your first place, keep it as a rental, and you can just keep growing that way as well. If you do that, if you multiply those two strategies together, buying 4-plex and then every year or two buy another one, it's even better, even cooler. You're gonna multiply faster. But that's so I've done part of that before, and I think it's a great way to get started. And yeah, so that's something I would suggest. And so just I guess maybe in conclusion, I usually like to ask my guests something just exciting or interesting in their life recently, and I don't know. I mean, for me, my life has been really exciting. I've enjoyed this journey. I enjoy what's going on with tent makers and the Year on Mission, working with young adults and seeing them, grow and thrive as they seek to serve Christ in new ways. That's exciting for me. This whole real estate venture and getting multifamily has been exciting for me. I think trying to run my life more efficiently and to love my children better has been interesting. I have a lot of teenage children right now, so that's something that keeps me and my wife moving and hopping. Life is full and life is fun, and so I find a lot of excitement and joy in all of that. And so I was a preaching pastor for almost a decade. Basically preached every Sunday, and just this year, earlier in 2023, I turned most of that responsibility over to my friend Daniel, and I'm still serving in some pastoral role at my church, but not giving the sermons every week. And even that, I think, has been kind of a strange transition. Not bad, but taking a lot of getting used to. But I think has freed up some space to pursue some of these things that the Lord is calling me to. So I'm excited about that too. And like I said, definitely excited about starting these podcasts. I'm not going to go gangbusters on them. We'll just kind of release like one a month. But I do encourage you to, subscribe or follow whatever you do to get on these podcasts. Listen to these conversations. I think they will be well worth your while. Some good nuggets that you'll get from them. And just join me on this journey as we go together. into the real estate investing world. So thanks for joining me on this introductory episode, hearing a little bit about my story. If I would love to, if you want to, send me comments or messages, things you'd like to hear about or questions you'd like me to ask, or if you have hosts or guests that you think would be great for me to talk to, I'd love for you to share that with me in that way. And really just look forward to these episodes as we go forward. So thanks again for your time today, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us with another episode of Faith-Filled Investing.